The protests in France continue. So many are angry at French President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms, which would see the retirement age increase from 62 to 64. More than 1 million people nationwide have been protesting, and police say more than 440 officers have also been injured during clashes with protesters. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from the City of Angels, Los Angeles. Lisa, many of these protests began in January, and they're continuing unabated. There are even calls now for French President Macron to resign.
Yes, the French are very serious this time around. I mean, they have been pretty serious. I've been in France, actually in Paris, while there were protests, and they fill the streets. It's almost like a Saturday gathering. But this time around, we're seeing much more bold moves by the protests. We're seeing them set fires. We're seeing it spread across France. This is not just contained in Paris. This is in different cities as well. Look, the French people are very serious about this. They do not want the retirement age to be moved. When you think about it, look, 62 is very young, and 64 is also very young. So I know that the Europeans do look forward to retirement, and they do have a different quality of life than we do here in the States, at least. And in terms of being workaholics, I think a 62-year-old and 64-year-old in the United States is nowhere near retirement, at least mentally. So yes, they are on the streets. They're asking for Macron to step down. They're very serious about this, but I should say this is actually getting in the way. Obviously, Macron had to cancel some of his diplomatic meetings because of these protests, and of course, it's not a good look to see these fires burning in the streets of France, and the people coming out. They said almost 1 million people came out in protest against the government.
We've also heard that King Charles canceled a potential visit to France as well, because, like you said, the fire's burning, and with all the protests going on right now.
Right.
Lisa, we've been hearing reports that the Israeli government was potentially looking into outlawing the preaching of Jesus in Israel. What have you been hearing?
Right. So, this is a very important question. I have looked into this deeply because I'm very much interested in these reforms and what it means. So let's just unpack this for a moment. What we're seeing right now in Israel is a lot of people out on the streets, and they are leftists pretty much for the most part, people who do not want this right-wing government of Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, to put forward some judicial reforms. Now, just to rewind, Benjamin Netanyahu himself is a right-wing leader, but his coalition is more right-wing than he is, much more conservative, and it is made up of different constituencies within Israel. And as you know, Israel is a very interesting patchwork of different religions, different cultural backgrounds. You have people from the Middle East, you have people from Europe, and they are at odds right now because this is the first time in many years that these more right-wing constituencies are in office, and those who are on the left, who have had their time, are not on board with a lot of these reforms. Now, at the same time, there are many things being mixed up here and convoluted, and we have to straighten them out. And I want to do that right now. Every year, there are bills put forward, just like here in the United States and in Canada and any other country. And many of those are cockamamie. They're crazy. They're very extreme, and they get thrown out right away. One of those being that Christians cannot practice Christianity or read the gospel or learn about Jesus. That was put forward by a very extremist politician, and it was thrown out by Benjamin Netanyahu already. It's already been thrown out. It will never survive, and it's probably not the first time that it was proposed. Right now, we have to be careful of a lot of the reporting that's coming out of Israel, because in order to illustrate the point that right-wing politicians should not have a say or should not put forward these reforms, and I'm not saying whether they're right or wrong, I'm just saying a lot of misinformation is coming out in order to illustrate how extreme these politicians are who are in office. One of those bills being about Jesus, another one, I can give you many examples. I don't want to get into it. We actually will have this expert on Israeli the Constitution and Israeli law on the Foreign Desk podcast next week to really break this down, and I will report back after that. But just to answer your question right now, this bill was absolutely thrown out. It will never survive, and I will tell you, the only place in the last few decades where Christianity has thrived in the Middle East has been Israel. And I'm sure that Bibi Netanyahu and anyone else who loves the land of Israel loves that the three religions of the world, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, can live side by side in a small country the size of New Jersey. And we know that the Christian Friends of Israel are some of the biggest supporters. They are absolute Zionists, and they have helped the country thrive. And I'm glad to see that it will continue that way.
Thanks so much for that, Lisa. We really appreciate it. Now, let's also talk about what's happening in Syria right now. 19 fighters were killed in Syria by U.S. airstrikes after an alleged Iranian drone attack. There are reports that Iranian proxies have carried out around 78 drone or rocket attacks against U.S. troops in the Middle East since the start of 2021.
Exactly right. And thank you, Hal, for bringing up that important statistic. I also have another statistic. Just since October, we have 30 or more attacks without consequence. This is one of the only times we're seeing an actual retaliation by the United States, and it begs the phrase too little too late, perhaps. We are seeing an emboldened Iranian regime that has been able to get away with really provoking the United States. We're actually in a proxy war with them. You know, for anybody who thinks, Iran is thousands of miles away, they can't reach us. I mean, they do threaten Israel, but guess what? They can reach us, and they are reaching us in Syria and in Iraq and in other places in the Middle East where the U.S. has assets or has interest. And that's exactly what's happening, especially, Hal, when there are no consequences. You'll see them provoking us more and more and more. Secondly, you have protests going on in Iran, and the best gift we can give the Iran regime would be to take the attention off of the protests on the streets that are against them, with the people calling for regime change, and for them to be able to say, look at us, we're fighting the United States, or we're involved in a war, or we're involved in a proxy war, and to get really to distract from what's going on back at home. So let's keep our eyes on this. This is very, very important. These proxy wars are very important. And of course, we're glad to see the United States actually step up. But again, the message has to come loud and clear from the White House that it will not tolerate this kind of behavior.
You know, when Donald Trump was president of the United States, Iran knew where it stood. There was no real gray area. But now it appears as though a perceived passivity by the Biden administration by some has appeared to really embolden and given Iran's regime that much more confidence.
Absolutely. And you're seeing that play out day by day, right? So with Donald Trump, he withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in May of 2018. And again, that nuclear deal was what President Obama got us into in 2015. Very happy to shake hands with Iran's regime, but we got nothing for it. Then we just got a piece of paper with some meaningless signatures on it. It did not stop the Iran regime from marching forward with its Iran nuclear program. From enriching uranium, from getting the parts to deliver a weapon, and from making threats against Israel and the United States. And of course, human rights abuses back at home carry on. Then fast forward, you had President Biden. He campaigned on getting back into the deal. Now imagine, there was no behavioral changes. This was just an ideological shift in the White House to get back into the deal, to make friends with the Ayatollahs once again, and to apologize for Donald Trump's behavior. That's exactly what we're seeing play out now. Now, the Biden administration has taken a step back from getting back into the nuclear deal and said, we're not going to move forward just yet. Well, it didn't mean that they changed their policies. The Ayatollahs know exactly where the White House stands, that they are not enforcing sanctions properly, that they are not serious about any part of holding Iran's regime accountable for any of these measures, or calling them out, or supporting the people on regime change. So for that fact, we see Iran's regime really playing out the clock, seeing what they can get away with during this Biden administration. And of course, they have gained. They have made absolute gains. And one last fact that's very important is that even though we didn't go forward with the Iran nuclear deal to release billions of dollars to Iran's regime in that way, like we did in 2015, the Biden administration has found unique and creative ways of releasing money to Iran's regime, and most recently through Iraq, getting Iran paid $500 million or more, and there's many deals coming that way. And again, looking the other way while Iran makes deals with China and Russia. So it's a much longer story. We have to connect the dots, and we have to understand that the passivity that we're seeing from the White House has absolute consequences, and that's what we're seeing from the Iran regime.
Lisa, Russian President Vladimir Putin says as the West steps up its military support for Ukraine, his country will set up nuclear weapons in neighboring Belarus. Could we maybe see the Ukraine-Russian conflict turn into a nuclear war?
Well, that's what it sounds like. There's concern, right? Obviously, we knew that Belarus was going to get involved in some capacity, and here we are. They will be having their nuclear weapons there. Of course, this being very, very worrisome, as you said. Will this be the next escalation we see? And that has always been the big question. I mean, we're waiting. Look, this is Putin's world. We just live in it, right? We're waiting to see what his next step will be, and of course, the big question being whether or not this will turn nuclear. Look, we still talk about this conflict as, what or how will this de-escalate? And the United States and the West, and I know Canada's involved as well, and as are many nations in Europe, giving more money and giving more resources to the Ukrainians. To what end? I mean, if Russia is threatening us with nuclear weapons, if they're now holding them in Belarus, if we know that is their next step, I mean, how can we ever combat that with any of the billions of dollars of military aid that we're giving Ukraine? So, the international community has to get creative, and they have to get smart, and they have to really think about how to de-escalate this as soon as possible.
Let me ask you something. Are we getting any closer to a peace accord between Zelensky and Putin?
Right. When you hear about Putin holding his nuclear weapons in Belarus, that should tell you everything you need to know about how close we are to a ceasefire. It seems as though as time goes on, both of them become more emboldened. Zelensky becomes more emboldened to win this somehow. I mean, and I say that because he's going around asking for more and more aid and resources, and really shaming countries that have given him already so much to giving him more. And somehow it's worked thus far. It has worked. People have become very generous when it comes to giving aid to Ukraine. Look, nobody wants to see this war, but people are getting tired of it, and we want to see some sort of resolution. I mean, this is taxpayer money. This is money that, again, can be used, to help other causes. And I know that Taiwan and China are watching. And if the West is running out of resources, how will they help Taiwan in a meaningful way if China should decide to invade? And if they do, will that be during the Biden administration? And will they be smart enough, I should say, to make that calculation, to say, look, the West is really overspent when it comes to military aid and getting involved in foreign conflicts. We have a presidential election coming up here in 2024. Are we really going to get involved in another war? So China will make that calculation as well. So many, many consequences to the foreign policy or lack of foreign policy that we're seeing coming out of the West right now.
I'm glad you brought up the election coming up next year in the United States. Will President be the Republican nominee? How about DeSantis?
Great questions, Hal. This is going to be a very interesting presidential election for us here. We may have a woman candidate, Nikki Haley, for the Republicans. DeSantis is a very popular candidate. DeSantis, however, has come up short in polls against Donald Trump. Donald Trump having his own legal issues and his name being tainted in many ways. Look, this country, I mean, I should say that the establishment here in this country is doing everything they can to stop the phenomenon that is Donald Trump. So we don't know how far he can get, but I know that the popularity is still there. He still brings in thousands and thousands of people who are going to drive, hours to see him. And I don't think any other presidential candidate has that kind of star power. He still has it. And of course, the Democrats probably just waiting by and seeing what they have to do. Maybe they have to do nothing and just watch the Republicans destroy each other themselves. So we'll watch this all, evolve or implode, whichever comes first, as we move forward towards the election.
The Daily Caller News Foundation says there's an email and some email evidence that appears to contradict Dr. Anthony Fauci's denials that he had any role in deciding who would be part of a 2020 conference call that discussed whether COVID-19 originated from a laboratory leak. Tell me more about that.
You know how it's so upsetting to watch the evidence come out about not only Anthony Fauci, but social media, the country, all being complicit in fabricating this narrative around COVID, around school closures, around different types of medications, around the vaccine, not being able to ask questions of your medical provider, and then now, as this comes out, I mean, what was his job? Why was he even involved in really shaping this narrative and not just just being the scientist that he was paid to be. And again, I think people are so fed up that a lot of people aren't listening to these corrections or this transparency that we're now getting. If we're being fully transparent anyway, this might just be a drop in the bucket, Hal, and there might be so much more to this, and I'm sure that there is. So yeah, I mean, it's very embarrassing. This is a stain on our country, on the way that we report in the news, the way that, I mean, Americans have every right to become numb to it all, to not trust your doctor, not trust social media, not trust the news outlets. I mean, where should we get information? And it seems as though there's this reverse dichotomy that we're living in. As we get more information and more artificial intelligence and more, search engine capability, we have less of an opportunity or fewer outlets to give us the truth and the news and to tell us what we need to know. And for that reason, I just hope that this next generation grows up with more questions than answers, and they are able to really combat this system. And it's stories like this, and I thank you, Hal, for really underscoring a lot of this, because I think it's very important to at least note that there were these kinds of fabrications all along the way.
U.S. correspondent and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks once again for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure. Thank you, Hal.